Yeah, are there other people joining us, or am I the only one?
People come on, pop on and off, at different times. So we just kind of go what's happening. Sometimes we have things to talk about. So.
Well, I bought a house here in York Springs, north of Gettysburg, and I found through tax records that it was built in 1827.
Okay.
And the woodworking here corroborates that. The mantles are federal style. The house remains pretty much unaltered, except in the early 20th century. It's a two-story brick house, and it has a main block to the front, and then in the back there's a back section that had a two-story porch at one time. And the main block of the house was changed in the early 20th century. The windows were all elongated. You can see that inside there now about a foot.
I wonder if that's when they put the two-story porch on too, because that's more Victorian than colonial.
It looks early. It's from the pictures that I have. It looks very early. But obviously the house was, the back section was always smaller than the main block. You can see that. And the alterations for the front section was the windows were elongated and they put a large porch on that covered the front and one side.
Right.
And I think I know the owner who did that. It would have been around 1916. The chair rail was removed at that time, probably because it couldn't go under the windows anymore. So what I'm trying to do is put the windows back in the back section. The house was hideously altered in the 1960s, just hideous. I got it in 2014, and I proceeded to fill two large dumpsters to the top.
Oh no!
The 1960s junk. Drop ceilings, cheap 1/8-inch thick paneling everywhere. It was as if somebody tried to make it into a trailer.
They thought they were making it fancy.
Oh my God! So anyway, I got rid of all of that, but the windows in the back section date from the 60s, and I'm now to the point where I would like to restore old windows back, 6/6. I bought some old sashes, hoping they're reasonably close in dimensions to the windows, but this is where I'm not as experienced. I've never done windows before.
How close are they to what the frames that you have?
Well, that's what I can't get a totally accurate measure because there's 1960s junk in the windows. There's
so they took out the original frames then too. Is that your assumption?
The entire sashes are gone. Yes.
Okay, and the frame to hold the sash in place.
Well, that's what I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have anything to look to see what was original. The window openings are original.
Okay.
So the actual the frame of the window itself is original.
Right.
And on that they installed aluminum tracks that the windows can go up.
Right.
The upper sash is immovable.
Okay. Are they wrapped now? Did they wrap them in aluminum? Wrap the frames in aluminum?
No. Yes.
Okay.
I've removed some of that, so they're to the point now where I put a mitered piece at the top and around to keep the windows from falling out in the room.
Right. Like a stop. Okay. Hold on just a second. I have a picture that might help. So we have never taken salvage sash and tried to put them into a window opening. That's why I was asking what size. Because if they're smaller, you could do glue ups on the side and make them reasonably look like they belong there. So when I'm talking, I don't know if you can see my picture.
Yes.
Okay. So when I'm talking about, this is what I'm talking about when I say the sash, like the inner part, the double hung, the 6/6, and then the frame. That's what I was wondering was original. Everything around it.
Yes.
Yeah. So that and typically when they do replacement windows, they tend to leave the frames.
They would cut out the stops
Yeah.
and the parting beads
So that's that little piece that holds the actual double hung in place. Yeah.
They would take them all out, the inside stop, the outside stop, and the parting bead. They would remove that, and that's just trash to them, and replace it.
By stop, I assume you mean the piece of wood that has a notch cut out that the upper sash sits on.
It's both. So this, let me see, let me point to it and then spin because I can't do both. This portion here at the bottom, this portion, that piece of trim that's closest to the sash is the stop. So there's usually an interior and exterior stop that hold the bottom and the top sash in, and then depending on the age of the building, there's a skinnier piece of trim in between the two sashes so that they each have like their own track to go in. And that's the parting bead. So that would be like this portion right here. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but so those they take out, and then usually a replacement window just plops right into the opening. They usually make the openings a little bit smaller, like
because
the glass size.
You got to put the frame and everything in, and then you got to trim it out again because it's usually a little bit thicker.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways that you could handle your problem. So you want to get rid of what they did in the 60s, and you want something that looks more historic and that matches the house. So
within my budget.
Well, if you're going to try to use the salvage trim, I would say not salvage trim, salvaged windows. I would say get some that are an inch or two smaller than your opening size.
Okay, that's good because that's about what I have. I think I got.
Okay, because I think that would give you enough play that then you could do glue ups on the side. So you would make thin strips of wood as a lamination, and then you could get it to fit into the opening.
Okay.
If you're going the salvage route, I think that's what you do. It's a lot easier to go bigger than to go smaller.
Okay.
Because if you went smaller, you're cutting joinery and you could hurt the integrity of the window.
I'm assuming if you were going to cut, you could cut a 1/16 of an inch off without.
You cut a 1/16, but if you needed an inch, and so you were taking like a 1/2 inch on each side, that would be too. Yeah,
then it would look funny anyway. Yeah.
I do that, but it's usually when I'm making new ones.
Yeah.
And I'm planning for that. So.
Yeah. So the other option I would. And we're doing true mortise intended, depending on the age of the sash that you've salvaged. They're not always true tenons. Like our house was built in the 20s, and we don't have true tenons. We have like they're almost like what we would call they're not finger jointed pieces of wood, but they're like shiplaps on those.
These are really old. They were supposed to have been taken out by Amish of a farmhouse in York County that was of similar age to my house. They look
so it probably is true mortise intended.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, and so you would have less issues with that than more modern, and I'm using that loosely. The other, and just like to run through your options, I think that's probably your easiest and your least expensive option.
But am I correct in assuming that on both sides of the window opening there is a piece of wood that runs from bottom to top that has a notch in it that the upper sash sits on to prevent the upper sash from coming down?
In the very old colonial ones, yes. And
that sometimes it's just a block of wood in that track that just sits right underneath the top sash.
Because I'll tell you, the 1916 windows that I have, they're made that way, but it looks like they kind of repurposed what was there. It's hard to tell, but it looks like they tried to add on to something that was already there.
Right.
You can see where they filled in the old openings for the shutter hinges and made new ones a little lower down. But there is a single piece on both sides, and it goes up, and then where the upper sash is, there's a notch, and it's not much. At that point, that piece of wood's not much narrower than the actual just the bead.
Right. Yeah, and so like the evolution of
I
windows.
know. He's got ones like we had them for Carlton,
Mhm.
where there's no parting bead.
Yeah,
It's what happens is the bottom piece is where you're talking about the track is. That's solid going all the way up till it hits your upper sash.
Right.
And then that runs flush at that point. That way, when that's put in, it's usually nailed in. And then what that'll do is, as your interior window, your bottom window will slide up and down that, and that's actually part of the track, the upper
right.
sash.
Yeah, because it doesn't have a parting bead, and that's what I was. So the evolution.
You mean the upper sash is part of the track of the
Right,
lower?
it's part of the track of the bottom
Mhm.
window.
And that's how the 1916 windows function.
Yeah. The earliest windows were casement windows, and then we went to single hungs, which was just the bottom, which is kind of what we're talking about with you, just the bottom moving. And then they went to double hungs, where the top and the bottom both moved, and that's usually with a counterweight system. So
Right.
that's kind of the evolution of traditional windows.
Yep.
There's a lot of aspects of this house that are a little old-fashioned for 1827. I get the feeling that the person who built this might have been doing it the way he's always been doing it.
Right.
You know?
Well, and two, we see a huge difference, and you're in York County, so that's even, or you're in Adams County, aren't you?
Adams County, yeah.
Yeah, you're in Adams County. So you were even further west, but we see between like Lancaster County and Philadelphia, we see like a 15-year lag between Lancaster, like in the same age of house. So
Right.
it's just, some of it's just, there wasn't as much movement between the areas then.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it took that long to catch on.
Yeah.
So if I rip out all this 1960 junk, I would just have the window opening. But then
You should have a frame. Fingers crossed.
Yes, the frame is there. I know that.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so
So
then
yeah,
I
so
have
then
to
you would have the opening to put your restored sash in.
right, but I'd have to have a piece of wood on both sides to hold the upper sash in place. Is that?
You would have an exterior stop still, wouldn't you?
That's what I mean, the exterior one.
There should be.
Yeah, you would have an exterior stop, and then the piece underneath the two of you were talking about to hold the upper sash in place, and then an interior stop to hold the bottom sash in place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Is there any tradition at all that with the sashes from that time period be exactly the same size, or would one be slightly smaller?
Typically, they're bigger on the first floor, and they get smaller as they go up. So
But I mean, in a single window.
In a single window, typically they're equal. If they're 6/6, just about.
But I mean, when I say one smaller, would one be maybe like a ½ inch smaller?
Oh, I don't know if anybody would notice that unless you were working on it, would you?
This is where it's a lot of mathematic formulas
Oh, you would
to
have
lay out the glass.
You would, yeah, I was gonna say you would at least need your side rails
To be the same.
to be the same so that they line up when they're
Yes,
moving.
the old sashes that I bought, some of them are a little tiny bit smaller than others, and they came from the
I
same.
think you could make that adjustment on the lamination, couldn't you?
Well,
But
he's
again-
talking where the trim, where the profile
The
is.
width.
Like say the width on the bottom might be a little bit smaller than the one on top. And usually they're the same.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
But if it's a little bit,
Yeah.
most people can't tell an eighth of an inch, or you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. This,
I don't know if it would be noticeable. Yeah, to an average person, unless you had them out and were working on them.
my fear in doing this is that the sashes that I've purchased would be too not wide enough, and we have too much play, and they'd be wiggling back.
Well,
and
you
forth.
can solve that with your lamination. So after you know, like after you take all the stuff off and you know the size of your opening, then
What we do, like say if it's a ½ inch short, right, for width. What I'll do is make a piece that's a little bit thicker than the window.
Yeah.
And maybe a ½ inch, so I probably would add, I don't know, 3/8. That way I could fit it a little bit tight on each side. And I would actually glue pieces on both ends.
yeah, and you glue it and clamp it.
Glue it and clamp it. That way you can sand it out. And if you have to, what I use is PC Woody. and let that sit, because it's actually an epoxy that expands and contracts because it's got wood fibers in it. And we've never had an issue with that one. Like a lot of people use auto body fill,
like
and
Bindo.
that does not work whatsoever.
It doesn't give with
And
the wood.
once it's sanded and painted, you can't tell. And that's how when, you know, like we screw up.
Yeah.
And that's how we fix them sometimes when we cut it a little too short.
Well, and sometimes in a restoration, like somebody bought it and aggressively sanded it, and then the windows are really sloppy. And
we'll
so,
have to do
so
the
then
same
we'll
thing.
do the same thing, so we get a tighter fit.
Right. Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Yes, it's just that I've done a lot of work with my hands, and I work for an organ building company actually. So
Oh yes.
that helped
But
me.
he could build these things if he wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could do that, but you know, I could pay somebody, but I'm dealing with a cash issue here. So I went and bought old sashes for $10 a piece, and they were
that's a great
they
deal.
were in good shape. A lot of them, the original wavy glass was there.
Yes.
I went to York Reclaimings and got some more wavy glass. So
Yeah, we were there this week. We were disappointed. You must have gotten it all.
No, I didn't. I they had a huge amount. I bought 15 panes of glass. I had to put them up and see which ones were the most.
Oh wavy. Yeah, I stand out there. I've been out there on really cold days in January. It's not fun.
Yeah, right. So, all right. Well, the only other thing I was doing right now is that I'm taking the upstairs back bedroom has an oak floor from 1965.
Okay.
And I'm in the back bedroom in the back room, and I'm taking up the floor now in the back room, and it's revealing very wide heart pine floor.
Yeah.
I mean, wide.
Yes, really wide. Yeah.
Much wider in the main section of the house.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be a
that
little
would
bit
be
more
the older
pine
part.
looking. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. With a lot of sanding.
Do you know how you're going to finish it?
Well, that was about to be my question.
Okay.
Because, I sanded the floor. I didn't want to sand it, but I had to sand the floor in the front section. It was just a horrific condition. And so I tried to be as careful as I could and not overdo things. But I did put stain on it, and I know that there was not originally stain back in this time period.
Right.
But the floor was still in condition as such that it wouldn't have looked nice.
Right.
So I kind of adopted a philosophy of that I wanted this house to look like the same family had lived in it for generations, and it just had gone through a natural evolution without anything tasteless being done, you know. But I'm open to suggestions now that I'm doing this section again. So.
Well, if the floor's not in bad shape, like if they haven't glued stuff down to it, or done terrible things to the floor, typically we'll just clean it with TSP and water and a shop vac, scrub it, it makes a slurry, vacuum up that, and then just keep doing that until you have clean water. Then we'll usually, we do sometimes stain and do a polyurethane, especially if it's like a family is going to be living there and they need like something a little bit more durable. But oftentimes we use a light brown Brie wax. Now that's a little bit of a maintenance. You have to do it every 2 years.
If I was going to do stain, I would want to look into something a little more authentic than mint wax, you know?
Right. Yeah. I'm pretty sure the Real Milk Paint Company, they were a podcast guest a few months ago. I'm pretty sure that they have some stain options. That's something else that we've done. We've actually brushed milk paint on and then Brie waxed on top of that. That's something instead of using a stain. Because the milk paint comes as a powder. I don't know if you've used it or if you're familiar with it, but it comes as a powder, so you can add as much or as little water as you want, depending on the consistency you want. And so if you're doing like folk painting, sometimes you want it a little bit more clumpy. If you're using it as paint for trim, you want it more of a regular consistency, or
extra watered
down if you want to do like a wash on the floor and then wax on top of it. The other mixture that we use fairly often is a third turpentine, a third spar varnish, and a third linseed oil. Make sure it's real linseed oil. And the spar varnish we can only get at Marine because of the VOCs. We can only get at Marine supply places now.
Well, what's that? Sorry, what's the name of that stuff?
Oh, you just made, spar varnish. It's SPARR, I believe. I never want to spelling bee. Oh, is it 1R? It's Johnson said it's 1R.
Okay.
Yeah, spar varnish.
Well, you just brought up another sore point, and that is you can't get oil paint anymore.
Yeah. Unless, yeah, you can't. We use oil-based primer typically. You can import paint from Europe that is still oil-based, but it's super expensive, and it's really touchy because it's really high pigment, but it's gonna last. So, you know, it's paying a little bit more now to not have to deal with it in another 5 years.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was my issue because I feel like I'm putting paint on that's going to need painting again. I was not.
Right, and that's exactly what will happen. We changed homeowners policies this year, and I got a letter from them saying you need to fix your front porch. It has dry rot. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I know what dry rot is, and our porch doesn't have dry rot. It just needs to be painted. But it's like the cobbler's children, you know.
Yeah. Well, another thing they did in 1916 was paint the exterior brick.
Did they?
Kind of a dark red, not real dark red.
Yeah.
There was a chimney on the side which got torn down in the 60s, and that's got the original brick. Beautiful. I wish that it was all like that. And then it got painted white in the 40s.
Oh yeah, and once brick's painted, that's really hard
To get off.
It's hard to get off. Early on, when I was working, when I first started working, we did a project that the architect had us acid washing the paint off of the brick, and we won't do that again. Afterwards, every time it rained, the sidewalk was getting red because the the brick was just deteriorating because the acid just ate away at that hard layer of the brick. There's just not a lot of good solutions after it's painted. So typically the guidance is don't paint brick, but if you paint it, keep it painted.
The sandblasting will do the same thing.
Oh, it will. Yeah. And even faster, probably.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
Depending on who's doing the sandblasting. There's
a beautiful house from 1817 in East Berlin that's very much like my house, but it's got the original brick. It's just gorgeous to look at. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. And
you're welcome. If you have any other questions, let us know. We're happy to chat with you.
Okay. And you have this every Wednesdays?
We do, every Wednesday at 4:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the same link? Same Zoom
It
link?
is. Yeah, I made it so it stays the same. Yeah.
Wonderful. Again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Bye.